This is Berchtesgaden, perhaps one of the most attractive small towns in Germany. In the centre of the town, right next to the tourist information office, one finds the old cemetery. Along the walls of the cemetery there are memorials to the soldiers from the town who did not return from 2 world wars, which have been restored and continue to be maintained by a local gentleman who wants to preserve the memory of what happened in those terrible times. The cemetery was originally laid out in 1685. Here we can find various local, and indeed Bavarian, celebrities. Demand for a place here is so high that when some of the plots became available in 2018, the local authorities announced a lottery. Nonetheless, 2 graves are those of people buried who had a very negative effect on Europe during the Third Reich. Hans Lammers is buried here, who during World War II was an integral part of the National Socialist government. Another person buried here is Dietrich Eckart. Although largely unknown outside of Germany, or even for that matter, maybe even Berchtesgaden, Dietrich Eckart probably thought of himself as a philosopher or a thinker. The reality is he was more of a drunken rambler. Nonetheless, he had more influence on some of the most terrible events of the 20th century than almost any other. It was he who was the mentor of Hitler. He was born in 1868 in Neumarkt, about 32 kilometers southeast of Nuremberg, which was then in the Kingdom of Bavaria, but soon to be in the United Germany. His father, Christian Eckart, who, as a royal notary and lawyer, was quite well off. His mother, Anna, spent most of her time in the local Catholic church. Eckart took his religion from his mother, who died when he was 10 years old. The young boy was a problem child, getting expelled from several schools. Eckart initially studied law at Erlangen, later medicine at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. Like many students, he spent his time drinking. Fencing was also a popular pastime then. In 1891 he dropped out of university to become a writer. Around this time he became a drug addict with a morphine problem which lasted for the rest of his life. In 1895 his father died also, leaving him a considerable amount of money that Eckart soon spent on alcohol, drugs and women. He moved to Berlin in 1899, by this time almost penniless. Although he became the mentor to the worst ever racist mass murderer in history, and indeed, like Hitler later, Eckart was not always an anti-Semite. In 1898, Eckart wrote a very favourable poem about a Jewish girl, extolling how beautiful and virtuous she was. The 2 people he admired most were the poet Heinrich Heine and Otto Weiniger, who were both Jewish. The Austrian Weiniger was a writer who committed suicide in Vienna in 1903, aged 23, after converting to Protestantism. Years later, Hitler recalled a remark Eckart made about Weiniger. "I only knew one decent Jew, and he committed suicide on the day when he realized that the Jew lives upon the decay of peoples." This would suggest that his conversion to anti-Semitism came around at the turn of the century, when Eckart was in his 30s. In the capital of Germany, Eckart became the protégé of the artistic director of the Prussian Royal Theatre, Count Georg von Hülsen-Haeseler, 1858 to 1922. The Count kept his plays on the stage, and thus Eckart had a steady income. One such play was the 1912 adaptation of Henrik Ibsen's Peer Gynt, which ran for more than 600 performances in Berlin alone. Eckart interpreted the play to have been a nationalist German as the hero, who is fighting against Jewish, troll-like characters. In the introduction to the printed play, Eckart wrote that self-sacrifice is part of German nature and that there would be a bloody war of annihilation against the army of the trolls. Perhaps one could argue that that war of annihilation came not in the First, but in the Second World War. Eckart identified himself so much with the play that his own letterhead used the name Peer Gynt rather than his real name. Up until then, Eckart had been struggling, but the success of the play changed his financial situation. His was now a riches to rags back to riches situation. It made him a lot of money and powerful connections amongst the wealthy, connections which were to benefit Hitler later. His living standards were further assisted when he married a rich widow in 1913. Rosa Marx, née Wiedenberg, from Bad Blankenburg in Thuringia. He lived with her until the summer of 1915, when he moved back to Munich. He divorced his wife in 1921. Although nationalist, his nationalism did not go as far as to fight in the armed forces, although years of substance and alcohol abuse had certainly taken their toll. In his mid-40s when World War I started, at an age when he was perfectly able to join up and fight, Eckart just didn't bother. Obviously, there was no point in risking dying for your country when others would do it for you. Soon after his return to Munich, he founded the Hohenlichen publishing house. Eckart then started to write about the superiority of the Germanic race using the works of various 19th century authors as his base. Eckart tried publishing poetry as well as the book Henrik Ibsen's Peer Gynt. In 1917, he published a war speech by Walter Sturmen. This type of published material was racist and anti-capitalist, and one example he did after the war was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which came out in 1923. In 1918, Eckart became the editor of a racist journal called Auf gut Deutsch, which would translate into English as in clear language. Working alongside him were Alfred Rosenberg and Gottfried Feder. Although unwilling to fight for the Empire and Kaiser, he was strongly opposed to the Treaty of Versailles and the Weimar Republic. He was a proponent of the stab-in-the-bath myth, whereby Jews, communists, social democrats and defeatists caused Germany to lose the war while the troops were unbeaten in the field, and he of course was safe out of harm's way. Captain Karl May, Hitler's superior in army intelligence, had this magazine distributed for political training in the Reichswehr, the new German army. Auf gut Deutsch came out weekly from December 1918 until it was banned in August 1921, when Eckart euphorically approved of the murder of former German finance minister Matthias Erzberger. In January 1919, Eckart, Feder, Anton Drexler and Karl Harrer founded the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, German Workers' Party, which was shortened to DAP. He wrote the lyrics of Deutschland erwache, Germany awake, which became the anthem of the future Nazi party. In February 1920, Eckart changed the name to the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, National Socialist German Workers' Party, or to give it its abbreviated form, NSDAP, or the Nazi Party. Following the ban of the publication of Auf gut Deutsch, he was instrumental in acquiring for the party a newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter. This newspaper had been published under a different name since 1887 and had largely concerned itself with racism and scandals. By 1920 it was owned by the Thule Society and was heavily in debt. Eckart mortgaged his home in order to guarantee the finance so that the Nazi Party could buy it. Eckart believed in the coming of a German Messiah, who would redeem Germany after its defeat in World War I, and wrote a poem to that end, referring to the Great One, the Nameless One, whom all can sense but no one saw. Later that year, Hitler came to a meeting, allegedly in order to spy on a party meeting, and the two met. At this point, as a little aside, I would like to pose a question. Why was Hitler spying on a political meeting when the person who sent him there was already distributing auf gut Deutsch? Was it to check that the German Workers' Party was not in fact a communist type organisation? That's just me thinking about the subject. If you've got any ideas, write them down. Eckart may have believed that he had found the Messiah. The two became close like father and son. Eckart became the mentor of the future Führer. Eckart was able to introduce Hitler to others, such as the photographer Heinrich Hoffmann, and with whom he had a relationship for the rest of his life. Indeed, Eva Braun later worked for Hoffmann. Through Eckart and fellow party member Alfred Rosenberg, they influenced Hitler to see an ally in Russia, where the latter had been born. The Bolsheviks had just come to power. This made Hitler at the very outset anti-communist. Eckart also introduced him to Max Erwin von Scheubner-Richter, another Baltic German, an intellectual who thought along similar lines. Scheubner-Richter was to die next to Hitler in the beer hall Putch. Another contact of Eckart for Hitler was socialite Helen Bechstein, who later was to provide significant funding and more contacts amongst very wealthy Berlin society. In 1919, Captain Karl Mayer had recruited Hitler into army intelligence, and it was he who sent him to spy on the Nazi Party amongst others. He knew of the planned Cap Putsch and arranged for Hitler and Eckart to fly to Berlin. The plane was piloted by Ritter von Grimm, who was later to become the last commander of the Luftwaffe. They were there only to observe the event. They were not required in any form at all. Wolfgang Kapp, a nationalist civil servant who planned the attempted coup, had known Eckart for some time and had donated to the Nazi Party. This was Hitler's first trip in an aeroplane, and he was sick. However, it didn't put him off flying. By the time they reached Berlin, the putsch had almost collapsed. They returned to Munich disappointed. Although he himself had notably avoided military service for his country, in 1921 Eckart offered a prize of 1,000 marks to anyone who could name one Jewish family whose sons had served longer than 3 weeks at the front during the First World War. Samuel Freund, a rabbi from Hanover, named 20 Jewish families who met this condition. Eckart refused to pay, so Rabbi Freund sued. During the trial, Freund named 50 more Jewish families. Eckart lost the case and had to pay. In 1921, 1,000 marks was very approximately how much a labourer could expect to earn in a month. In June 1921, Eckart and Hitler were in Berlin trying to raise money for the party. In their absence, the party board attempted to merge the party with another, which infuriated Hitler when he found out. He was so angry that he resigned from the party. But he returned when Eckart managed to persuade the board to let him be the leader, which happened on the 26th of July 1921. Hitler was the only one who was a good speaker and therefore capable of fundraising. Without Hitler, the party would have sunk into obscurity. Thomas Weber, in his 2017 book Becoming Hitler, notes that when Eckart gave Hitler the book in which his play Peer Gynt was written, he pointed out that the will of Peer Gynt to rule the world also meant that he would ultimately be pardoned for all his sins. Therefore, he advised Hitler that as he strove to be the saviour of Germany, he need not worry about the use of violence. This would suggest that Eckart saw Hitler as the German Messiah at this moment. However, did he see that through a haze of alcohol and morphine? In December 1921, he referred to him for the first time as Führer. What he expected from a Führer, Eckart described as follows: "This has to be someone who knows what a machine gun sounds like. The mob must be afraid. I can't use an officer. The people no longer have any respect for them. The best thing would be a worker who has his mouth in the right place. He doesn't need to be too bright. Politics is the stupidest business in the world." It's as though Eckart himself saw the person who he would choose to be this leader. A bit like a John the Baptist figure, I think. Whereas Hitler later recalled how they would talk long into the night, perhaps even with a tear in his eye, it could well be that once he'd had a taste for power, his feelings towards his mentor started to cool. I suspect that Eckart's alcohol problem may have been the cause. Sometime in early 1923, Hitler and Eckart went to Switzerland on a fundraising expedition. Eckart had been there in November 1922, and it seems as though he had promised to bring along Hitler as the party star the next time. It is known that Hitler spoke twice over 2 days to German expatriates, Swiss military officers and several dozen Swiss business people, but something happened that no funds were forthcoming. Hitler blamed Eckart for his behaviour in company, and logically the only thing that could have caused this is consuming either too much alcohol or too much morphine. I'm guessing there, of course, there may have been another reason, but that is the most logical. On returning to Germany, Eckart was in trouble with the authorities for slandering German President Friedrich Ebert. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and Eckart went into hiding on the Obersalzberg above Berchtesgaden under the assumed name Dr. Hoffmann. In April, Hitler came to visit him, staying at the Pension Moritz under the assumed name of Herr Wolf. This was the first time that Hitler had been here, and this became his second home for the rest of his life. Whilst Eckart was in hiding, Hitler replaced him as the publisher of Völkische Beobachter with Alfred Rosenberg. Perhaps due to his drinking problems, perhaps due to being in hiding, Hitler knew that Eckart would have to be replaced, although he spoke very positively about Eckart at the time, noting that he was not quite up to running something as big as a newspaper. Clearly, publishing deadlines and alcohol did not mix. It seems that there was also a disagreement on a personal level. Hitler was always very courteous around women. Ernst Putzi Hanfstaengl, looking back 20 years later, said that Eckart treated women in a totally different manner. There was also a difference on strategy. Eckart was in favour of a putsch in Berlin and had supported the Cat Putsch, but did not see much sense in attempting one in Munich. By May 1923, Eckart seems to have been having second thoughts. Hanfstaengl said that he complained that Hitler had megalomania halfway between a messiah complex and Neroism, after Hitler had compared himself to Jesus throwing the money changers out of the temple. Despite growing apart on daily matters, Hitler regularly visited him, seeing him perhaps as the grand old man of the party, or indeed the father figure. The role that Eckart played in the beer hall putsch is not clear. He disagreed with it, noting that a putsch had to take place in the capital, which is a rather logical place to do it. It would appear that Eckart was not at the beer hall, but was in the street the following day during the march. Logically, for the authorities, he was a suspect in the attempt to overthrow the government. He was arrested one day after the putsch and held in Landsberg prison along with Hitler and other party officials. On 20th of December 1923, he suffered a heart attack which led to his release. He died 6 days later on the 26th of December 1923. Had Hitler not come to power just over 9 years later, then that would have been the end of the story. However, it's in his death that Eckart becomes a major figure. His publishing company was taken over by the Nazis and continued to produce the same sort of materials. Eckart's unfinished pamphlet, Bolshevism from Moses to Lenin, My Conversations with Hitler appeared posthumously. It was put together by Alfred Rosenberg. How much of it was written by Eckart, or Hitler, or Rosenberg is not known. One can find it on the internet. It's a sort of rambling that one might expect from some with too much alcohol and hate in their system. Eckart's hiding place, the Obersalzberg, became the second capital of Germany during the Third Reich. Eckart had introduced it to Hitler and he loved it. This brought about an influx of people, some of them wanting to see Hitler, a phenomenon called Führer tourism. Party officials wanted to live near their boss. That was the way they got influence. This meant that labourers had to come here in order to provide them with the homes and infrastructure that officials in the Third Reich thought they deserved. In turn, this led to a demand on medical services. Hitler, therefore, ordered the construction of a new hospital. On the 6th of May 1938, the foundation stone was laid and the building topped out on 15th of December 1939. The Dietrich Eckart Hospital opened on the 13th of June 1942. At the time of me doing this, it's an empty building, although it was used for medical purposes until around 1996. During the Nazi period, streets and memorials were named in his honour throughout Germany. Some of them can be still seen today, though of course they have been renamed. On the 10th anniversary of his death on the 26th of December 1933, schools had to devote a lesson to him throughout the country. In Hamburg in 1933, a prize for cultural workers was named after Dietrich Eckart, which was awarded parallel to the Lessing Prize. His birth town of Neumarkt bore the official name affix Dietrich Eckart Stadt, so it became Dietrich Eckart Stadt, Neumarkt. In 1934, Hitler dedicated a monument to his honour in the city park, which still stands. The open-air stage of the Berlin Olympic site, now the Berlin Waldbühne, was named after Eckart after it was built in 1936. This is what it looks like today. Schools were named after him. The upper secondary school for boys in Dresden-Johannstadt was named Dietrich Eckart School, High School for Boys. When the school in Emmendingen was expanded into a full high school in 1937, it was also named Dietrich Eckart Schule, Oberschule für Jungs. In Mulhausen in Thuringia, the Petri School was renamed the Dietrich Eckart School and was renamed back to the Petri School in 1945. Streets all over Germany were named after him, starting in 1933, when a street in the west of the city of Regensburg was named after Eckart. It was renamed Gerlichstrasse in 1963. Today's Adolf Reichweinstrasse in Jena was named after Dietrich Eckart. In 1933, his name was given to what is today's Judenstrasse in Gotha. In 1934, a section of Tegeler Strasse, Wittenauer Strasse and August Müller Strasse in Berlin was named after Eckart. Today it's Gorki Strasse, after Maxim Gorki. In 1935, a Dietrich Eckart Strasse was laid out in Hanover, which was renamed Gangerhofstrasse in 1945. In the Free City of Danzig, a street built by the German Labour Front in 1936 to 1937 was called Dietrich Eckart Weg. It was renamed Ulica Grodzienska after 1945. Hitler was noted for liking an easy life and would frequently reminisce about old times, especially during the war, when perhaps he should have been doing something more related to the situation. Eckart was a frequent topic of his conversation. It is said that when Hitler in late years spoke of him, a tear came to his eye when he recalled his mentor. One can see Eckart's grave in the old cemetery in Berchtesgaden, right in the centre of town where apparently a lady in Munich pays for its upkeep. The graveyard is also the resting place of hundreds of the victims of the Nazis, soldiers who were killed in Hitler's war, one must imagine how sick the family of the victims must feel at the sight of one of those whose philosophy created the evil of Nazism, the deaths of millions, and the war itself.